Yeah, great. Thanks, Greg. Hey, everybody. I'm Ross Philippak, Chief Information Security Officer at Corsica Technologies. And in this presentation, I'll be talking about some cybersecurity trends and threats for 2024. And as a managed cybersecurity services provider, I think that Corsica is kind of in a unique position. We work with clients in a lot of different industries. So manufacturing, healthcare, finance, really all across the board. So I think we have, some pretty unique perspective for observing some of these different cyber trends and threats. And I'm going to be talking about some big things that we're seeing out there. Just a high-level agenda. Some of you probably will recognize a handful of these things as not necessarily being new for 2024, but rather these are the types of things that we continue to see organizations struggling with, really in all industries and all over the globe. So I think it's important to really hammer on those, to talk about what we can do to mitigate risk from these types of things. And, I hope it goes without saying, but this is going to be a non-exhaustive list. There's really no way I could capture every potential cyber threat and trend for 2024 in a single presentation. So I'm going to focus on the types of things that we see the most of. So to start out, just to lay the groundwork a little bit, some background information. The cost of cyber attacks on the global economy is predicted to top $10.5 trillion by the end of this year. So if you try to wrap your mind around that figure, I mean, this is just, it's mind-boggling. I mean, clearly, cybersecurity is no longer something that we can just leave up to chance. So this really means that cybersecurity has to be treated as a strategic priority for us on an individual, organizational, and governmental level. This is really why I'm such a proponent of conducting a proper cybersecurity risk assessment for your environment, using a tried and true framework, something like CIS-RAM or the FAIR model. Those are both great resources. But really, if you guys think about the cybersecurity product marketplace today, there are a million products out there, all kinds of security hardware and software and services. All those vendors position their products as kind of being the magic bullet for cybersecurity. But unfortunately, there is no magic bullet when it comes to cyber, and no organization has enough time or people or money to just go out and buy all the products to implement them, right? So we need some judicious way to figure out, what do we really need from a safeguard perspective to protect our environments? What's actually going to be effective for us to implement, and what can we kind of put on the back burner? So that's really the purpose of conducting a cybersecurity risk assessment, so we know where to focus our protection efforts. Also, as Greg mentioned earlier, AI is going to have a transformative impact this year on both attack and defense. Its impact is going to be felt across every one of the trends that I'll cover here. I've got some more slides coming up about AI, so stay tuned. The cybersecurity skills crunch, as a managed cyber services provider, this one kind of hits close to home for me. But we've been seeing a shortage of professionals with the skills needed to protect organizations from cyber attacks, continuing to be a running theme. And in fact, research indicates that 54% of cyber professionals believe that the impact of the skills shortage on their organizations has actually gotten worse over the past couple of years. You can kind of see the graphic there on the slide over on the right from the IHL study. 42% of companies have IT staff availability as a top pain point. So this continues to be something that we see. And for those of you who have ever tried to hire cybersecurity talent, particularly good cybersecurity talent, those people tend to be expensive, they tend to be difficult to find, and they tend to be difficult to retain. So we really see that continuing to be a running theme. But efforts to rectify this situation include increasing salaries. So, that's great, but you can only go so far before the economics just don't make sense. Certainly greater investment in training and development and upskilling programs. These are great ways to attract and retain skilled cybersecurity talent. But here again, these things tend to be expensive, and they tend to get more expensive over time. So as the result of this, we've really seen a dramatic increase in the amount of outsourcing to manage providers with the necessary tools and skill sets. Generative AI for both good and evil. We've talked about AI a couple times already today, but as AI increases in sophistication, we're going to continue to see more sophisticated and smarter AI-powered attacks. These are going to be things that range from deepfake social engineering to automated malware that intelligently adapts to evade detection. So, kind of the classic example of this, if there is such a thing, you guys remember like 5 years ago or 10 years ago, it was usually pretty easy to spot phishing emails. There would be a lot of misspelled words and poor grammar, really a lot of red flags that our users could be trained to be on the lookout for to spot a phishing email or some kind of social engineering attack that's coming in and reaching them. So really what we've been seeing as the result of generative AI tools are that cyber criminals, particularly those who are not native English speakers, now have the ability to craft very believable emails written in perfect English, no misspellings, no bad grammar. And now, our end users are having to contend with those types of attacks. So it just really puts an additional burden on us as organizations because the number of red flags that are at our disposal to look for now is dramatically shrunk. So, that's not to say that it's only the bad guys who are able to make use of AI. The good guys are having excellent results with it as well. So at the same time, AI is going to help us detect and neutralize cyber threats thanks to things like real-time anomaly detection, smart authentication, and some automated incident response capabilities. So I could speak for Corsica as a managed cybersecurity provider. Many of the tools that we use to deliver our cybersecurity services and the tools that our security operations center uses to monitor those tools and those services already make heavy use of artificial intelligence. So they just really help our SOC analysts be much more efficient and effective and accurate when it comes to investigating and triaging cyber attacks. So I think, definitely some strong advantages for AI for the good guys as well. So what we can say is that if cyber attacks and defense this year is like a game of chess, then AI is the queen. So whoever controls that has the ability to create powerful strategic advantages. Next level of phishing attacks. So, this is certainly nothing new. Phishing has been a problem for a lot of organizations for a long time. It's going to continue to be a problem, particularly when used in conjunction with generative AI, like I was talking about on the previous slide. Saw a pretty interesting statistic a couple of months ago, and that's that 80% of all successful cyber attacks actually target people, not computers. And it makes sense, right? If you're an attacker, why do you want to spend a month or a week, a week or a month or, even a year trying to hack your way in to, through somebody's firewall or hack into somebody's server? Well, you could just phish their employees and trick all those people into giving you their usernames and passwords. Attackers like to work smart, not hard. So certainly they're going to continue to hammer away at phishing until we get better at detecting and stopping it. So the response to this, kind of like I implied a second ago, is that it'll largely revolve around organization-wide awareness and education. So continuing to be aggressive about security awareness training for our employees, it's just going to be so critical to do. For many clients, I recommend that if you're in a position right now where you're doing like a big batch of annual cybersecurity awareness training, look at splitting that up over the course of the year. So maybe move to a quarterly training model with a smaller volume of training courses. And the reason that tends to be more effective is that, as long as we can routinely get this training information and testing in front of our employees, that tends to keep these concepts fresh in memory, and people are less likely to kind of put it on the shelf and forget about it. IoT cyber attacks. So some of you probably recognize IoT. IoT is the acronym for Internet of Things. So when I talk about IoT devices, I'm talking about really any electronic gadget that connects to our network in some capacity, but doesn't actually have a human user sitting behind it. So, you think about nowadays, refrigerators and toasters and smart TVs are a great example. All these things, people buy them and then they connect them to the network, and then they tend to forget about them. So over time, a lot of these things wind up missing firmware updates and security patches. And really what that does is it just really increases what we call the attack surface for our organizations. It gives those potential attackers a lot more that they could potentially grab onto and hammer away at to try to breach our environments. In addition, with the work from home revolution continuing, the risks posed by workers connecting or sharing data over improperly secured devices is going to continue to be a threat. So, I would imagine most of you, certainly back during the pandemic, had a lot of employees working from home, probably using personal devices, connecting to your business environments across infrastructure that your IT department didn't necessarily have visibility into or the control over. So that caused a lot of problems for a lot of organizations. Cyber resilience. So I think two terms that a lot of times get used interchangeably, but really mean two different things, are cybersecurity and cyber resilience. But the distinction, I think, is becoming increasingly important. So while the focus of cybersecurity is on attack prevention and detection, the focus on cyber resilience is on response. So some of you may have heard the adage that it's not a question of if you get breached, it's a question of when you get breached. So from the cyber resilience standpoint, the more effort we can put into preparing for that inevitable breach, in other words, sitting down and taking the time to develop a proper incident response plan, and then periodically testing that plan to make sure it's doing what we need it to do. All the preparation we can do ahead of time is just going to make life so much easier for us if we ever end up needing to respond to a breach. So very important to do, going to be crucial going forward. Less than zero trust. Some of you may be familiar with what is called the, excuse me, some of you may be familiar with what's called the zero trust framework. This is a model of network architecture that stresses that there's really no perimeter within which the network activity can be assumed to be safe. So really what that means is, you think about 10 years ago, a lot of organizations were set up so that if employees were physically working in the office, you had people coming in and working in their offices or out of their cubicle. A lot of times we set those up so those people could bypass things like multi-factor authentication and many of the other cybersecurity controls that they would otherwise have to go through if they were trying to connect from the outside, right? So what zero trust says that we do is kind of flip that model on its head. And it says that we should assume that all of the devices in our environment, whether they're the devices in our offices or the devices that our users are using, to connect from home or from hotel rooms, we should assume that all those things are compromised. So we're going to take other measures to protect our organization's data. And generally that amounts to very granular, very accurate authentication and authorization. mechanisms for that data. But for those of you who are familiar with CISA, that's the US government's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, they recently put together a really great white paper on zero trust architecture that does a fantastic job of explaining what that is conceptually. So, if that's the type of thing that interests you, I'd really encourage you to check out that CISA white paper. It's a great reference. Cyber warfare and state-sponsored attacks, these have been going on for a long time. They're not going to let up anytime soon. And I think for the rest of our existence, we're going to have to continue to deal with these things. So certainly the war in Ukraine has exposed the extent to which nation states are willing and able to deploy cyber attacks against both military and civilian infrastructure. And that we're not just seeing that in Ukraine, certainly with Israel and Gaza, this is a big deal as well. Going forward, wherever military operations take place around the world, they're going to go hand in hand with cyber warfare operations. Physical warfare and cyber warfare are going to be inseparable. They're always going to go together. So the most common attacks that we continue to see originating from state-sponsored actors are phishing attacks. Like I mentioned a few minutes ago, 80% of all successful breaches start with phishing. Attackers know this. They know it's highly effective. So that continues to be what they focus on. So being able to gain access into their victim environments to do disruption and espionage, and even things like denial of service to knock systems offline, that tends to be the hallmark of these state-sponsored threat actors. Separately from warfare, though, we've got major elections coming up this year in the US and the UK and India, and we can expect to see an increase in cyber attacks that are aimed at disrupting those processes. And lastly, we are continuing to see a trend toward soft skills becoming increasingly essential for cybersecurity professionals. So, I can tell you, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when we would hire a talented, cybersecurity engineer, chances are pretty strong that we'd end up putting him or her in a closet someplace and just having them focus on malware analysis or, doing the technical things to detect cyber threats in the environment. And that worked well for that time. But if you think about today, cybersecurity is just so tightly woven into all of our business processes and all of the information technology that we use across our organizations. It's just becoming so important for those who are tasked with cybersecurity for our environments to be able to communicate effectively with all the rest of our employees. So yeah, certainly the soft skills we definitely put a premium on. And I think unfortunately a lot of times, that just continues to make it more difficult to find people who are able to do what really needs to be done. But yeah, certainly this is going to be a trend that continues and it is just going to get more important as the years go on. So yeah, with that, I can open it up for questions if any came in.
Yeah, let's just do the questions at the end, and then we'll just get through all the data and we'll do all those, Ross, there for sure. But yeah, if you got questions for Ross specifically there, please do offer those questions up because chat's pretty quiet right now and we could use those questions. So thanks, Ross. All right, let's talk about the study specifically. Let's get into more deeper data here. And once again, to remind you, this was in January that we did this study. So it was after the new year that we collected this data here. And when you look at the mid-market and below, it's mostly a DIY type of environment today. Most companies are doing their own, trying to hire their own people in-house to do security. And the data showed pretty significantly that is often towards the detriment. So it's a sort of a penny wise, pound foolish type of approach when it comes to certain areas there. So when we look at that we see OEM has a major part, particularly when it comes to hardware purchase and installation side of things, and it pretty much holds at about 13% of the overall there. And then third-party services really start to come into play when you start getting into the remote management and the end user support. And that's where the third parties comes in. And what the data showed is some pretty significant differences here. So one of the things we did is we cut the data based on who were the highest sales leaders and profit leaders. And so how we define that is you were a sales or profit leader if that category grew by 10% or more in 2023. You were an average performer if your revenue or your profits grew 0 to 10% there. And then you were a below average performer if you were flat or negative there. That may or may not be fair, but that's the way we looked at it. And what we saw is it's pretty much across the board, both sales leaders as well as profit leaders. But this particular one shows you that the people with the highest profits are 192% more likely to be using third-party support for end users, and 59% more likely to be using for a third party for remote IT management. And then when you broaden that out to satisfaction, overall, about 1 in 5 companies are dissatisfied with their current situation. If you look at that, it's pretty standard across the board in terms of the percentage that dissatisfied, with the highest satisfaction being with the desktop repair side, and the lowest being with the end user support overall there for that. So when it comes to the satisfaction, though, for end user support, the people that are using third party are 45% more likely to report being very satisfied than those that are using OEM, and 23% more likely than those that are doing in-house. So that seems to be a thing where a third party can really be an assistant and really helps things there. As well, we asked about pain points. What are the biggest pain points? And it's really not a surprise. We see this in tier one as well. That legacy software or that technology debt is by far the number one issue that impacts the pain points, and particularly support there. There, 74% of our sample rated as that. It was number one, I believe, for almost every category there. Except for the below average folks. And we'll get into those details here in a second. Cybersecurity, number 2, the software integration across platforms. Number 3, the network speed and reliability. This is a huge issue for the below average performers here, and it's significantly higher than everything else. So this is kind of an eye chart here, but it shows you the 9 pain points that we asked about, and where the rankings were based on the financial performance. So as I mentioned, the legacy software was number 1 for leaders and average, but it was number 2 when it came to the below average performers, because the cybersecurity and company protection was the number 1 issue for them. There. The data integration there is much higher for the sales leaders and average sales performers. The below average folks, it was farther down the line, mainly because they can't do it due to the issues that they're having with the security as well as the legacy there. Next, the hardware device workstation issues. And I wanted to bring your attention to the AI supported technology. The sales leaders are far more likely to be moving towards the AI support there, and have ranked that as a big issue that they want to be investing in. And I mentioned it earlier. Next one is network speed and reliability, and you can see the massive difference that you see between that being a problem for the lowest performers there. So there seems to be a really strong correlation between your ability and your network and what your financial performance is as a company, particularly when it comes to support. The other one to bring your attention to is the IT staffing, and I'll talk a little bit about that going forward. But for the sales leaders, the best performers, far less likely that they're having any staffing issues as a leading pain point, where for average and below average performers, that is a pretty consistent theme that we saw throughout the data for things there. So the network issues, the below average guys were reporting that 46% higher than the sales leaders there. When you look at the actual data, they're much higher priority, because they could pick 5. And so it wasn't just that everybody rated it. It's just, it had to make your top 5 for the selection to even be included. And so as a result of that, it hit for the below average salespeople a lot. Then the IT staffing managers, the people that did not have staffing issues, okay, or claim to not have that as a major pain point, okay, or one of their top 5, they saw sales growth that was 136% higher, and profit growth 125% higher in 2023 than those that did have staffing problems when it came to IT and cybersecurity. That's a big deal, and that's data that every business owner should pay attention to here for that, because the idea of what do you do well and what you don't do well, and how can you get through that now. So the other thing is that we found is the rich are getting richer, so to speak. The people that grew their sales growth there, they spend 88% more of their IT budget on cybersecurity than the average performers, and nearly 3 times more than the below average performers do. It's a much higher priority for them, and how much of that is just simply because they have access to the budget versus those that don't. Or is there a correlation between that? But the data is extremely strong, though, that there is a relationship here between the spend on cybersecurity and the financial performance of the organization. Whether it's a cause and effect, it's hard to say. When you look at it on a per area, whether it was a sales leader or a profit leader, you see 285% more for the sales leaders there, and 61% for the profit leaders versus the below average providers there. The other thing is that the sales leaders were far more likely to use a targeted managed security provider rather than just a managed service provider when it came to cybersecurity. 29% more likely there. That's a little self-serving with our sponsor here today, of course. But it does point out that there is a correlation here that we saw, that not only were they using third parties more, the sales leaders, but they were also targeting more specific third parties when it came to security there, so they could get the best benefit for what was going on. The other thing is cloud spending. Cloud spend is continuing to grow. This is one of these things that's kind of ebbed and flowed for the tier 1 and tier 2 providers, but as you get lower down the line, it's continued growth area, not only in just inflation related to that, but more of the items going out to the cloud. And a lot of that driving factor is related to the AI piece and getting all your data to communicate with each other, so you can use some of these generative AI tools related to that. I sound like a broken record probably to all of you here. But basically, this is transformative. The AI, not only from a threat standpoint, but also from a protection standpoint, but also just a business growth standpoint. It is the ultimate force multiplier, particularly if you're able to leverage it on your core data. Tools like Microsoft Copilot 365, when it's your data, is pretty mind-blowing in terms of what it can do, in terms of helping your knowledge workers improve what they're doing there. So we've seen it in customer support tremendously. And where the biggest growth has been is not with the experts, but with all the support history into a system that can be queried. The newbies get up to speed of expert within about 30 days, which normally used to take over a year. And that's big things there. And a lot of that has to do with that data availability and getting that interaction across those different systems there. And not surprisingly, the rich get richer. The profit leaders are growing their cloud spend at a rate much higher. and they're doing it in these areas where they're investing much higher than the below average profit companies. These collaboration systems, the Microsoft Office, like I mentioned, the Google stuff as well. When you can use your data to do that, it is a tremendous force multiplier, and we're starting to see it come out in public companies. Somebody mentioned Klarna. I was watching CNBC this morning, and Klarna had some layoffs, and then they talked about they didn't have layoffs. They shifted people into AI roles, and their profits went up significantly when they did that and started teaching their people how to leverage AI there. So this is something that is going to continue to go, and a key driver of that cloud-based hosting is once again getting to that single version of the truth of your data that can be leveraged. Now, whether or not that's in a single data lake there, or you use a product like Snowflake that uses microservices to connect all those things, that's neither here nor there. You can use each one of those types of solutions, but it is clear that when you're able to enable AI on those business solutions, it has some major impact financially. And related to that, our last slide here is about AI. The best performing companies, believe it or not, are 27% more likely to be upgrading this year to AI. What's interesting, this is more of a U though. The average companies are less likely than the below average companies. The below average companies are number 2. And we find that pretty common when it comes to transformational technology. The below average companies seem to take this Hail Mary approach to certain technologies when they're not ready for it. And I think that is the key thing. If your data is not ready and you start deploying a lot of these AI tools, you're making forecasts faster that are wrong. If your data is ready, then you get much better forecasts. And so that data piece of it is absolutely crucial here. So getting that in line for things there. So those best performers are not only spending more on IT, they're spending more on security in IT and more on AI in IT. So it's kind of like racing Usain Bolt or Xavier Williams the other day in the 40 there versus Rich Eisen. If you haven't seen that meme, it's pretty hilarious. Rich Eisen's got like a 12-yard lead in the 40-yard dash, and Xavier Worthy, not Williams, Xavier Worthy passes him with the last step there in terms of running a 40-yard dash there. But every step he gets further and further away is my point. And that's one of the things that is of interest here with AI and some of this IT spend. So that's it for our canned stuff. We're going to turn the cameras back on and we're going to move to Q&A for things there. I do want to let you guys know that we've got another webinar next week that will do a bit more related to the economy and talk about how RFID, computer vision, and some of the AI stuff is radically improving retail performance. If that's of interest to you, you can click that. And as we get moving here, I'll dump the slides connection there so you can get the slides and the report. So let's talk, Lee. What do we got?
All right. I'll toss this out to both of you. The first question is, do you think AI will be a net negative or net positive for cybersecurity?
I think the jury is still out on that one. Like I mentioned in the during the presentation, it's kind of the Wild West almost. There are a lot of things that the bad guys are already using it for. There are a lot of things that the good guys are already using it for. And it just, like I say, whoever ends up doing a better job with that is going to end up winning. I know that's not a very good answer, but we'll see. TBD on that.
You got anything, Greg?
Yeah, I would just say, it's a pretty amazing that every person on my team wants to change their payroll every day. It's the number of these phishing emails that I get on a daily basis, particularly the contract ones, the DocuSigns there have taken a momentous leap forward in the last couple of weeks even. It used to be you could tell really, really easily even a month or two ago that some of the formatting was just off. Now you can't tell. There's stuff coming through that looks exactly the same. And the other thing I would add related to the AI stuff that's critical, you not only need to have a safe word for your family in terms of things, but you also need a safe word for your company on anything related to systems or financial stuff there. There's a story of a guy that wired $25 million from Hong Kong, and because he was brought in on a Zoom call, which was a similar call he's normally been on, and everybody looked like they were legit that was there, and he got the order because they were doing an acquisition, and he wired $25 million as a result of that. Now that's really, really high end, but I've got a custom avatar myself, and I'll be honest with you, if I put some graphic overlays over the things that are quirky, you'd be hard pressed to tell whether that was me or a clone for that. For those things. So.
Okay. This one's for Ross. For those mid-market companies investing in MSSPs, can you please speak to the type of cybersecurity work they are contracting for beyond just risk assessments?
Yeah, good question. So certainly the technical cybersecurity safeguards tend to be a big chunk of what those services are. So when I say technical safeguards, I'm talking about things like endpoint security. So like a managed detection and response solution to make sure all your workstations, laptops, servers, mobile devices, all that are protected and monitored. Log management, specifically SIEM functionality, security information event management, being able to automate the collection and the analysis of all the system logs from devices in your environment is really important. This is something that you're probably noticing now when you go out to buy cyber liability insurance or to renew your existing cyber insurance policy. Invariably, they're going to ask you, what are you guys doing for log analysis, log retention? The insurance company wants some level of comfort that you're not, trying to delegate that to, some person, who's trying to manually, keep up with what's going on in the logs. So certainly being able to automate the log analysis and alerting, that's something that is a common thing, I think, for service providers to provide. Things like DNS security and secure internet gateway, things like security awareness training, like I was talking about earlier during my portion of the presentation, the awareness training, and then the kind of the flip side to that is awareness testing. So maybe being able to conduct like recurring phish tests for all our employees so we can identify who's doing a good job with their security awareness and then who could use a little extra reinforcement. Certainly, things like system patching and, that's been around for a long time. But yeah, I think by and large, the services are going to revolve around technical safeguards. Now, that's not to say they all have to be technical. You could get into like policy development and things like that. But yeah, there are a lot of pieces and parts to manage cyber services.
Okay. Greg, you mentioned a couple times that government data is delayed. Why is that?
Well, there's a lot of reasons. The first one I want to dispel is I don't think it is related to partisanship there. But it is taking about 3 months for the data to catch up right now. The biggest reason is related to the fact that the government takes a survey like we did here and extrapolates it to the entire market. They used to have about 65% of the overall market covered in their surveys. That's down to mid 40s now. The number of companies that are actually participating in the survey. And why that's so dangerous is if I sit there and looked at some of the data points in this and then extrapolated that to say all companies that are large companies or small companies or that invest in third-party support, that they're going to see that kind of financial gain, that's a misleading statement. And that's what the government is doing in the headline. Now, what is coming out, whether it's the jobs data or the retail data, it's almost like you get the headline and then you get the retraction the next month down on, on page 2 where nobody hears it, but anybody over goes. And that's why you see these incredibly positive job market headlines, and the reality of what people are experiencing in their community is completely different.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's partisan necessarily, but I do think it's a sample issue, because when you look at it, 11 of the last 12 labor reports on jobs have been revised downward the following month. In fact, almost 1.5 million jobs disappeared over the last year as a result of that. So those are things there. There was also related to this group, there was a major hack that happened in the Move It system in early last year. And it was about that same time where this data all of a sudden didn't make sense anymore that we were seeing. So it could be related to that. Could there be partisanship? Yeah, probably, but I think it's more the sample issue that's causing the issue.
Gotcha. Question for Ross. How much security awareness training is too much?
So I think that question really gets back to organizational culture. There are some organizations that I work with, banks in particular, tend to be very aggressive about the training cadence and the volume of training material. And then I've got, maybe some clients who work with less sensitive types of information, and, maybe a less socially critical function that aren't as aggressive as that. So I think it just really gets to the nature. It depends on the nature of the type of work that you're doing and the organizational culture. But that's really a challenge, right? Finding the right fit. You don't want to exhaust people, but at the same time, you want them to be on their toes all the time, because that's what's going to put you in the best position to protect yourself.
Yeah. Another one for you, Ross. Is there any thought leadership going on for how to take a more offensive approach to stop cyber attacks in the first place?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I don't know that we can ever stop the attacks from happening, right? Attackers are going to sit there all day long and try to compromise our environments. Really, the question is, how well can we detect those attacks? And then how well can we defend against those attacks? And like I mentioned earlier in the presentation, sooner or later, an attack's going to be successful. So how effectively can we recover from those attacks? So, I mentioned doing a risk assessment at the beginning of the presentation. I can't stress enough, that is really the best approach that we can take, especially if we haven't done some type of risk assessment in our environment previously. We want to know, for example, how might a cyber attack impact our ability to fulfill our mission or our operational objectives or our financial objectives, like the really important stuff. And then we want to, kind of view our cyber risk through that lens and then be able to protect ourselves accordingly. So yeah, that's a great question. I just, like I say, you can't stop the attacks from happening. All you can control is how well protected you are to resist those attacks.
Okay. This is for both of you, I guess. For the cost of cyber attacks in retail, how much of that, I mean, you talked about, what was it, $10.1 trillion? Was that the number at the
10.5?
Yeah. 10.5. Okay. How much of that is retail?
Yeah, that's another good question. I would have to go back and get that figure specific to retail. But
I can give you a range for that. If you use the percentage of revenue as a caveat there, which once again is dangerous to do, retail's about 24 to 25% of the total economy.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, because of payments and the nature of that, is probably high. So my guess is probably closer to 30. That is retail related.
So 30.
I mean, broadly by restaurants as well. What's that?
So 30% of the 10.5 trillion.
Right.
Okay. Okay. Well, that kind of lends up to the next question. Organized retail crime here in the U.S.
Yeah.
112 billion or whatever the number was from NRF. It's not quite a rounding error, but it's it's in the 3 to 4% range of the cyber attacks.
Well,
you got to address both of them.
If you put them together, yeah, yeah, yeah. Two different. I mean, the drivers are money, obviously, but two different groups generally that are doing that. You get a lot of cartels that are involved with the physical stuff, whereas a lot of it is Ukrainian, Russian, and Chinese and North Korean hackers when it comes to the retail stuff.
I'm seeing we're at the top of the hour. I'm sorry, Russ, I cut you off there. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, kind of looping into the state-sponsored angle that Greg was talking about. So many of these threat groups operate out of Russia and Belarus because they get protection from those governments in exchange for agreeing not to attack Russian entities. So, in a lot of cases, we know exactly who the bad guys are. We just don't have a way to actually get to them because they're operating out of a protected place.
Right. Right.
All right.
I think that's it. Yeah. Well, thanks everybody. We appreciate you taking your time, Ross. It's been a pleasure. Thanks everybody.
Thank you.
And hope you have a great rest of the week. Take care.
Take care, guys.
Bye-bye.